At 19 years old, her family sent her to a solitary Viking warrior as part of a debt agreement. But what seemed like a cruel fate would become the purest love she ever imagined possible. On the Eriksson estate, located in the harsh lands of northern Norway in the year 1247, lived Sigrid, a young woman of 19 years whose hazel eyes held secrets that no one in her family had bothered to discover. The family property stretched across acres of rocky land, where ice mixed with the ambition of a family that had built its fortune on timber trade and the exploitation of iron mines. Jarl Bjorn Eriksson, a 52-year-old man with calloused hands and a heart of stone, contemplated his youngest daughter with the same expression he used to evaluate horses at the market. Sigrid had not inherited the delicate beauty of her older sister Astrid, who at 23 was already betrothed to the son of the regional chieftain. While Astrid possessed fine features and golden hair like wheat, Sigrid had more pronounced features, skin bronzed by the northern sun, and dark brown hair that refused to remain ordered under her mother-of-pearl combs. The afternoon when everything changed began like any other. Sigrid was returning from the stream where she had gone to wash clothes, a task her mother insisted on assigning her because at least she should learn to be useful in some way. Her rough hands held the wicker basket when she heard raised voices coming from her father's study. She stopped in the hallway, her heart racing as she recognized the tone of desperation in Jarl Bjorn's voice. "I have no more options, Helga," her father said with bitterness. "The estate's debts are drowning us. I lost the last wager with the merchant from Bergen. He gave me an ultimatum. Either I deliver something of value equivalent to 3,000 silver marks, or he comes to claim half our lands." Lady Helga, a woman who had learned to survive through strategic silence, responded with a trembling voice. "And what can we give him? We've already sold the breeding horses, my mother's jewels, even the silver candlesticks from the chapel." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. Sigrid pressed her back against the cold wall of the hallway, feeling that something terrible was about to happen. When her father finally spoke, his words fell like a death sentence. "There is a Viking warrior who lives alone in the northern mountains, a warrior who signed peace with the king but remains isolated. The merchant mentioned that this savage offered a white stallion of pure blood, valued at 3,000 silver marks, in exchange for a wife. He says he's tired of loneliness." Jarl Bjorn paused, and Sigrid could hear the sound of liquid being poured into a cup. "We'll give him Sigrid." The world stopped. Sigrid felt as if the ground were opening beneath her feet. Her mother stifled a cry, but the protest died before being born. "It's the only solution," her father continued with calculated coldness. "Astrid is already betrothed. We cannot risk that alliance. But Sigrid, she has no suitors. No man of our class has looked at her twice. At least this way she'll serve to save the family patrimony. It's a fair exchange." Sigrid dropped the basket. The sound of wood hitting the stone floor alerted her parents. Jarl Bjorn opened the study door and found his daughter standing in the hallway with silent tears running down her cheeks, but with her chin raised in a gesture of dignity he had never seen in her. "When?" she asked with a broken but firm voice. "Tomorrow, at dawn," her father responded, unable to hold her gaze. "The merchant has already made the arrangements. You will be taken to the territory where the Viking lives. Consider it your contribution to this family that has fed and clothed you for 19 years. That night, while packing her meager belongings in a wooden trunk, Sigrid did not cry. She sat before the small, rusty mirror in her room and studied her reflection as if seeing it for the first time. She was not beautiful according to the standards of the society that had raised her, but there was strength in her eyes, determination in the line of her jaw. If her family considered her expendable, then she would find a way to become indispensable to someone else. Astrid entered without knocking, dressed in her silk nightgown while Sigrid wore one of a rough wool. "Sister," she murmured, sitting on the edge of the bed, "this isn't fair." "I could speak with father." "Could you?" "Could you what?" Sigrid interrupted without emotion. "Sacrifice your perfect future with the chieftain's son?" "No, Astrid. We both know this family has room for only one fortunate daughter, and that was never me." The sisters looked at each other in silence, separated by an abyss of privilege and destiny that neither had chosen, but both had learned to accept. When Astrid left, Sigrid lay in her bed for the last time, listening to the night sounds of the estate that would soon be only memories. She did not know she was about to discover that a person's value is not measured by their beauty or social position, but by the purity of their heart and the strength of their spirit. Dawn arrived too soon. Sigrid descended the stone stairs carrying her trunk, dressed in her only decent dress of dark blue. In the courtyard, a dusty wagon waited for her alongside two men, the merchant who had arranged the transaction and a mixed-blood guide with an expressionless face. The white stallion was not there yet. It would come later as proof that the exchange had been completed. Jarl Bjorn came out to the entrance but did not approach. Lady Helga remained hidden behind the curtains of her room, unable to face the farewell. Only Astrid ran down, pressing a small package into her sister's hands. "These are the seeds from grandmother's garden," she whispered hurriedly, "and her book of herbal remedies. I thought you might need them." Sigrid embraced her sister tightly, memorizing the scent of lavender that always accompanied her. Then she climbed into the wagon without looking back. As the wheels began to turn, taking her away from the only life she had known, a strange calm invaded her. She was going toward the unknown, toward a man her family considered savage, toward a future that would terrify anyone. But she was also going toward the freedom to be judged by something different than her appearance or her surname. And in that thought, she found a spark of something she had never felt before. Hope. The journey to Viking territory lasted 3 full days of travel under a merciless cold that turned the horizon into an undulating line of uncertain promises. Sigrid traveled in silence, watching as the landscape gradually changed from cultivated lands to wild wilderness, from ordered estates to rock formations that seemed like ancient sculptures carved by forgotten gods. The merchant, a corpulent man named Master Olaf, tried to fill the silence with empty comments about the weather and road conditions, but eventually gave up in the face of the young woman's lack of response. The second night, they camped near a stream where water ran clear between smooth stones. While the guide prepared a fire and Master Olaf reviewed maps, Sigrid walked upstream, seeking a moment of privacy. It was then that she heard the sound, a low chant, almost imperceptible, that seemed to emerge from the rocks themselves. She stopped completely still, her heart beating hard in her chest. A figure emerged from among the shadows cast by the dying light of sunset. It was a tall man, of strong but not excessively muscular build, with bronzed skin that shone like copper under the last rays of the sun. His black hair fell loose to his shoulders, and his dark eyes had a depth that made Sigrid feel he could see directly through her. He wore leather trousers and a simple shirt with a necklace of turquoise beads that was his only ornament. This was Ragnar, the solitary Viking warrior who would become her husband. "You are the woman they send," he said in Norwegian with a marked but clear accent. It was not a question but an affirmation, and his tone revealed neither if he was pleased nor disappointed with what he saw. Sigrid raised her chin, refusing to show the fear that threatened to paralyze her. "I am Sigrid Eriksdottir," she responded with a voice firmer than she felt. "And yes, I come because my family sent me. But I am not an object you can return if I don't satisfy you." For the first time, something like surprise crossed Ragnar's impassive face. He was accustomed to Norwegian women looking at him with terror or disgust, but this young woman confronted him with a mixture of nervousness and defiance that he found interesting. "I do not seek satisfaction," he finally replied. "I seek companionship. Someone to share my home, who knows the plants that grow in these lands, who keeps the fire alive when I go hunting." He paused, studying her with greater attention. "Your family receives a horse of great value. I receive a wife. We both fulfill the agreement. Whether that makes you an object or a companion will depend on how you choose to behave." The words fell between them like stones in deep water. Sigrid felt something change in her perception. There was no cruelty in his words, only direct honesty. Ragnar did not pretend to love her or mistreat her. He simply established the terms of a coexistence that neither had chosen completely. Master Olaf appeared then, breathing heavily from the walk. "Ah, I see you've already met," he said with false joviality. "Excellent. Tomorrow, at midday, we'll arrive at your territory, Lord Ragnar. The white stallion will be delivered to Jarl Bjorn next week, as we agreed." Ragnar nodded briefly before disappearing into the shadows with the same ease with which he had appeared. Sigrid remained by the stream for a long while, trying to process the encounter. The Viking was not the brutal savage she had imagined based on the stories that circulated at the estate. There was intelligence in his eyes, dignity in his posture, and something else she could not identify, but that provoked an unexpected curiosity. The following morning dawned with a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. The group resumed the journey, and now Ragnar guided them, mounted on a gray horse that moved with silent grace. Sigrid observed him from the wagon, noticing how he moved in perfect harmony with the animal, how his eyes constantly scanned the horizon seeking signs she could not interpret. When they finally arrived at the territory where Ragnar lived, Sigrid held her breath. It was not the miserable hut she had imagined. It was a construction of timber and stone situated in a protected valley, with a stream running nearby and trees that provided generous shade. There was a small garden with plants she did not recognize, empty corrals that once must have housed animals, and a general sense of careful order. Master Olaf descended from the wagon, anxious to complete the transaction and return to civilization. "Miss Eriksdottir," he said formally, "here concludes my responsibility. Lord Ragnar is now your husband, according to the agreement. May God bless and protect you." Sigrid descended from the wagon with trembling legs, holding her trunk with hands that struggled to remain firm. The merchant and guide departed quickly, leaving a cloud of dust that eventually settled, revealing the absolute silence of the valley. She was alone with a stranger in the middle of territory she did not know, with no way to return and no certainty of what would come. Ragnar approached and took her trunk without asking permission, carrying it toward the house. "There are 2 rooms," he explained in a neutral tone. "You can use the one to the east. It has better light in the mornings." He stopped at the entrance, turning to look at her directly. "I will not touch you without your consent. This marriage is legal according to Norwegian laws, but it does not have to be real if you don't want it. I share my home with you because loneliness was consuming me, not because I seek to impose something you do not wish to give." The words struck Sigrid with unexpected force. Throughout her life, she had been invisible to men of her class, considered too unattractive to merit attention. But this man, this Viking her family considered savage, was offering her respect and choice. Something warm and unknown began to awaken in her chest. "Thank you," she murmured, following him inside the house. The space was simple, but clean, with handmade furniture that showed artisan skill. There were herbs drying from the ceiling, woven blankets with beautiful geometric patterns, and a sense of peace that contrasted dramatically with the constant tension of the Eriksson estate. Ragnar showed her to her room, a small but cozy space with a bed covered by soft blankets, a window facing east as he had promised, and a small wooden trunk for her belongings. "Rest today," he said from the doorway. "Tomorrow I'll show you the territory, the edible plants, the safe places. If you're going to live here, you need to know the land." When she was left alone, Sigrid sat on the bed and finally allowed tears to flow. But they were not just tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of confusion, of a fragile hope that was beginning to germinate in her wounded heart. She had been sent here as punishment, as a convenient solution to her family's financial problems. But as she watched the sunset paint the sky orange and purple through her window, Sigrid began to wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, what seemed like a condemnation could become something completely different. Night fell softly over the valley, bringing with it the song of crickets and the constant murmur of the stream. In separate rooms, 2 strangers united by circumstances neither had chosen prepared for sleep, each wondering what dawn would bring and whether the destiny that had united them would be their perdition or their salvation. The first days in the valley passed in a dense silence that weighed more than any words. Ragnar left before dawn and returned when the sun had already set, leaving prepared food on the table without saying anything more than strictly necessary. Sigrid spent the hours alone, timidly exploring the surroundings of the house, feeling the crushing weight of being invisible again, only now in a completely strange landscape. The 3rd morning, while Ragnar prepared his hunting tools with precise movements that revealed years of practice, Sigrid gathered the courage to speak. "Is there something I can do? Some task? Something useful while you're away?" He didn't even look up. "I don't need help," he responded in a neutral but firm tone. "Stay within the limits I showed you." "The territory is safe if you don't go far." The words fell like ice on Sigrid's skin. The rejection was subtle but undeniable. He didn't want her near, didn't need her presence. He simply tolerated her as part of a commercial agreement, exactly like her family. That afternoon, desperately seeking something to do to avoid going mad in the solitude, Sigrid remembered the package Astrid had given her. She unwrapped it with trembling hands, finding the seeds carefully wrapped in cloth and her grandmother's small book of herbal remedies. The yellowed pages were filled with annotations in delicate handwriting, recipes to cure everything from fevers to deep wounds. A memory struck her mind with brutal force. She was 14 years old at the estate when her mother organized a gathering of high society ladies. Sigrid had prepared a medicinal tea following her grandmother's instructions, proud to be able to contribute. When she served it, Lady Gunhild took a sip and immediately spit it out. "What filth is this?" she had exclaimed in front of all the guests. "Sigrid, proper young ladies do not prepare concoctions like Indian healers. That's what servants do." The laughter of the other women had resonated in the hall like sharp knives. Her mother had thrown the tea on the floor, staining Sigrid's new dress. "Clean up this mess and go to your room. You've already embarrassed us enough." Sigrid blinked, returning to the present with tears burning her eyes, but now there was no one to humiliate her. She pressed the book against her chest and made a decision. If Ragnar didn't need her help, she would find her own reason to exist here. She began preparing a small space behind the house where the earth seemed more fertile. She dug with her hands, not finding appropriate tools, breaking her nails, filling her skin with blisters. She planted the seeds of chamomile, comfrey, and peppermint that Astrid had saved from the family garden. Each seed was a silent promise that she could be something more than a burden. When Ragnar returned that night and saw the disturbed earth, his expression hardened. "What did you do?" he asked with a controlled but tense voice. "I planted a medicinal garden," Sigrid responded, raising her chin despite the fear she felt. "I know you said you don't need help, but I need to have a purpose. I cannot simply exist doing nothing." "That earth is not good for cultivation," he replied coldly. "It's too rocky. The plants will die in a week." He passed by her without saying more, leaving her standing in the twilight with earth under her nails and hope dying in her chest. The following days were a silent battle. Sigrid watered her plants every dawn and dusk, speaking to them softly as her grandmother had taught her. Ragnar completely ignored them, passing by the small garden as if it didn't exist. The tension between them grew like invisible weeds, filling every corner of the house with unexpressed discomfort. One afternoon, while Sigrid tried to repair a clay pot she had found broken, her clumsy hands caused it to break completely. The pieces fell to the ground with a sound that seemed to resonate throughout the entire valley. Something inside her broke too. She collapsed on the dirt floor, surrounded by pottery fragments, and finally allowed all the accumulated pain to come out. She cried for the family that had discarded her like a worthless object. She cried for the man who treated her like an inconvenient presence. She cried for the 14-year-old girl humiliated in front of society ladies. She cried for all the times she had tried to be useful and had only received rejection. She didn't hear when Ragnar entered. She only felt when he knelt in front of her, not touching her, but present. The silence extended between them while Sigrid fought to control the sobs shaking her body. "My wife died 3 years ago," Ragnar finally said in a low voice. "She got sick during winter, high fever, cough that wouldn't stop. I tried to cure her with all the plants I knew, but nothing worked. I watched her die slowly, unable to do anything to save her." He paused, his own voice breaking slightly. "Since then, I've lived alone, because I can't bear to see someone else in the place that was hers. I can't bear the idea that someone tries to occupy a space that still belongs to her." Sigrid looked up, seeing for the first time the vulnerability hidden behind the warrior's cold facade. Ragnar's eyes shone with a pain she recognized perfectly. "I'm not trying to occupy anyone's place," she whispered. "I'm just trying to find my own place, a place where I'm not a constant disappointment." Ragnar studied the pottery pieces scattered between them. "This pot belonged to my mother," he said softly. "I thought it could never be repaired after it broke during a storm." He took one of the fragments, examining it in the fading light. But perhaps some broken things can find new usefulness. He stood and extended his hand toward her. Sigrid looked at it for a long moment before taking it, allowing him to help her up. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle. "Tomorrow, I'll teach you where the best medicinal plants in the valley grow," Ragnar said, "and how to prepare the soil properly so your seeds have a chance to grow." For the first time since her arrival, something like a smile briefly touched his lips. "If you're going to be stubborn and plant anyway, at least do it correctly." That night, Sigrid lay in her bed feeling that something fundamental had changed. The crack in the wall between them was small, but it existed, and for the first time since arriving at the valley she fell asleep without tears, with the fragile hope that perhaps, just perhaps, two broken people could learn to coexist in their shared fragments. The following week brought subtle but significant changes to the valley's dynamic. Ragnar kept his promise, guiding Sigrid each morning through the rocky paths where plants she had never seen grew. He taught her to identify healing roots by the pattern of their leaves, to distinguish poisonous herbs from beneficial ones by almost imperceptible details, to listen to what the earth itself tried to communicate. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a different silence from the first days. It was not the impenetrable wall of mutual rejection, but something more like a careful truce between two strangers learning to share space. Sigrid observed how Ragnar's hands handled plants with reverence and began to understand that this man did not just know herbal medicine, he lived it as sacred practice. It was during one of these morning expeditions that they heard the sound of hooves approaching rapidly. Ragnar tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. "Stay behind me," he ordered in a low but firm voice. 3 men on horseback appeared on the horizon, raising clouds of golden dust under the midday sun. When they approached close enough, Sigrid could see they wore Norwegian clothes, but with details suggesting rough life in wild territory. The one leading was a man of about 40 years, with a deep scar crossing his right cheek and eyes that shone with barely contained greed. "Ragnar," the man called with unpleasant familiarity, "I've heard interesting rumors. They say you now have company, a Norwegian woman from a good family." His gaze slid toward Sigrid with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Jarl Torsten Grimsson, at your service, miss, though I doubt this savage has presented you properly." Ragnar took a step forward, completely blocking Sigrid's view. "Leave, Grimsson." "You have no business here." Jarl Torsten laughed, an unpleasant sound that bounced against the surrounding rocks. "On the contrary, I have a very specific business. You see, that white stallion you delivered as payment for your wife was my property. You stole it from my lands 2 months ago." He paused, letting the words penetrate. "That means your marriage is based on a fraudulent transaction. The woman should be returned to her family, or perhaps I could keep her as compensation." Sigrid's world tilted dangerously. Ragnar had stolen the horse. She looked at his rigid back, waiting for a denial that didn't come. "The horse was mine by right," Ragnar said with a controlled voice but full of contained fury. "I won it in fair competition 3 years ago. You claimed it when your fortune declined, but that doesn't make it yours." "Norwegian law says otherwise," Jarl Torsten replied with a satisfied smile. "I have documents proving my ownership, and unless you can pay 3,000 silver marks to settle the debt, I'll have to reclaim what's mine." His gaze returned to Sigrid. "A young woman from a good family is easily worth that amount, perhaps more, depending on her condition." Sigrid felt nausea churning her stomach. This man spoke of her exactly as her father had, as merchandise that could be exchanged, reclaimed, possessed. But something different burned in her chest now, something she had not felt at the Eriksson estate: indignation. "I am no one's property," she declared, stepping out from behind Ragnar despite his gesture to stop her. "My family made an agreement." That agreement was fulfilled. If you have problems with the horse, resolve them with Ragnar, but I'm not part of any negotiation. Jarl Torsten studied her with new attention, clearly surprised by her audacity. "What spirit," he murmured. "I like that. Makes you worth even more." He turned his attention back to Ragnar. "You have 1 week to get the money or present proof of ownership of the horse. If not, I'll return with Norwegian authorities and claim what corresponds to me." He turned his horse around. "Enjoy these days with your wife, Viking. They may be the last." The men rode away in the same cloud of dust in which they had arrived, leaving a heavy silence in their absence. Sigrid observed Ragnar's tense profile, waiting for explanations that seemed stuck in his throat. "Is it true?" she finally asked. "Did you steal the horse?" Ragnar turned toward her, and in his eyes she saw a complexity of emotions she didn't know how to interpret. "The horse was mine. I won it in a racing competition years ago when I still traveled freely through these territories. Grimsson lost much money betting against me that day. When his fortune collapsed, he accused several Vikings of theft, claiming animals they had won legitimately." He clenched his jaw. "But I don't have Norwegian documents proving my version." "My word against his means. Nothing before your law." Sigrid processed the information slowly. Then he really could reclaim me. He could take me back. "He won't," Ragnar said with fierce determination. "I'll die before allowing that corrupt man to put his hands on you." The words struck Sigrid with unexpected force. It was the first time Ragnar expressed something like possessive protection toward her, and it awakened confusing emotions in her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "A week ago, you barely tolerated my presence. Why now would you risk your life?" Ragnar remained silent for a long moment before responding. Because I've seen how you work with plants. I've seen the tenderness with which you treat each seed as if it were precious. I've seen the strength you hide behind your insecurity. He approached slowly, holding her gaze. And because I started thinking that maybe two broken people can build something whole together. Sigrid's heart beat so hard she was sure he could hear it. But before she could respond, a scream tore the air from the direction of the house. They ran back to find a small boy collapsed beside the stream, his Viking mother sobbing over him, while other members of the nearby tribe gathered around. Ragnar knelt quickly. "Adderbite," he diagnosed, seeing the swollen bite on the boy's ankle. "The poison is already spreading. We need to act fast, or we'll lose him." Sigrid felt the world slow down. This was the moment. She remembered her grandmother's book, the pages about venomous bites, the antidote she had never had the opportunity to prepare. "I know what to do," she said with a voice firmer than she felt. "But I need you to trust me." Ragnar looked at her for an eternal instant before nodding. "I trust you." Sigrid ran toward the house, her hands trembling as she searched for the book and the necessary herbs. While preparing the mixture that could save or condemn the boy, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had changed forever. She was no longer the useless daughter of the Eriksons. She was someone who was trusted, someone whose hands held life or death. And she was not going to fail. Sigrid's hands trembled as she crushed comfrey roots mixed with plantain leaves and willow bark that Ragnar had gathered in haste. Her grandmother's book lay open on the table, the yellowed pages showing the exact recipe she needed, but the words seemed to dance before her eyes blurred by fear. Outside, she heard the boy's weak moans and his mother's desperate sobs. "Concentrate," she ordered herself aloud, remembering her grandmother's words during those secret afternoons in the estate garden. "Plants, listen to your intention. If you prepare with fear, you'll give fear. If you prepare with love, you'll give healing." She took a deep breath and began again, this time with firmer hands. She mixed the ingredients in exact proportions, adding stream water and heating the mixture until it released a bitter but penetrating aroma. When the paste was ready, she divided it into 2 portions, one to apply directly on the bite and another diluted for the boy to drink. She left the house carrying the remedy as if bearing the world's most precious treasure. The circle of Viking people opened to let her pass, their faces mixing desperate hope with skepticism. The boy, who couldn't be more than 6 years old, lay pale in Ragnar's arms, his breathing shallow and agitated. The bite had swollen his ankle to double its normal size, with dark veins extending upward like poisonous roots. "I need you to trust me," Sigrid said with a firm voice, addressing the boy's mother. "This will burn when I apply it, and he'll need to drink all the mixture even though it tastes bitter. But it can save him." The mother, a young woman with eyes swollen from tears, nodded frantically. "Do what you must." "Please, save my son." Sigrid knelt beside the boy, first cleaning the wound with fresh water before carefully applying the paste. The boy moaned in pain, his little body twisting, but Ragnar held him firmly while Sigrid worked with precision. Then, with infinite patience, she helped him drink the medicinal liquid sip by sip, whispering words of encouragement in Norwegian mixed with the few words in Old Norse she had learned. "Now we wait," she finally said, sitting back on her heels with her heart beating painfully. "The mixture should counteract the poison, but it will take time." The hours that followed were the longest of Sigrid's life. She stayed beside the boy as the sun slowly descended toward the horizon, observing every breath, every change in his skin color. Ragnar remained at her side in silence, his presence being the only comfort amid the crushing uncertainty. When darkness began to fall, the boy opened his eyes for the first time in hours. "Mother," he murmured with a weak but clear voice. The swelling in his ankle had begun to visibly reduce, and the dark veins had lightened. A cry of joy erupted among the gathered people. The boy's mother threw herself at Sigrid, embracing her tightly, while sobbing words of gratitude in Norse that needed no translation. Other women approached, touching her hair, her hands as if wanting to confirm she was real. Ragnar helped her stand, and when their eyes met, Sigrid saw something in them that made her tremble completely. Pure pride and genuine respect. "You saved his life," he said simply. But those 4 words carried the weight of entire worlds. That night, while the Viking community celebrated the boy's recovery with songs around a bonfire, the tribal chief, an elder named Ulf, approached Sigrid and Ragnar. His face, furrowed with deep wrinkles, shone in the dancing firelight. "The woman with hazel eyes has proven to have healer's hands and warrior's heart," he declared in Norse, which Ragnar translated to Norwegian. "Our tribe recognizes her as sister and protector. Any threat against her is a threat against all of us." Sigrid felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but for the first time in her life they were tears of absolute joy. She had found her place, not because of her surname or appearance, but because of what she could offer with her own hands and knowledge. 3 days later, Jarl Torsten Grimsson returned as he had promised, but he did not come alone. He was accompanied by 5 armed men, and to Sigrid's absolute surprise, her sister Astrid traveled with them in a covered carriage. Sigrid went out to receive them with Ragnar at her side, but now there was something different in her posture. She was no longer the insecure young woman who had arrived weeks ago. She stood with the confidence of one who had saved a life and earned the respect of an entire community. "Sigrid?" Astrid called, descending from the carriage with hurried movements. She looked haggard, with deep dark circles and a wrinkled dress. "Thank God I found you!" "I came to warn you." She cast a nervous glance toward Jarl Torsten. "He plans to take you by force. He says Father's agreement was fraudulent and that he can claim you as compensation for the horse." "I already know," Sigrid responded with a calm that surprised her sister. "He came a few days ago, threatening exactly that." Jarl Torsten stepped forward with a satisfied smile. "And now, I return with legal authority." He showed a sealed document. "The magistrate of Bergen declared your marriage null due to fraud in the transaction. You will be returned to your family, and I will receive appropriate compensation." His gaze slid over her with barely concealed greed. "Unless, of course, you prefer to stay with me voluntarily. I could offer you a much better life than this savage." Before Sigrid could respond, the sound of many horses filled the air. To everyone's astonishment, dozens of Viking warriors emerged from the surrounding hills, completely surrounding Jarl Torsten and his men. They did not carry raised weapons, but their presence was threat enough. Chief Ulf approached, mounted on a magnificent black horse. "The healer woman is under our people's protection," he declared in labored but clear Norwegian. "She saved the life of our children. She is our sister. If you try to take her, you will declare conflict against all Viking clans of this region." Jarl Torsten visibly paled. His men exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, they had not anticipated facing organized response from the Vikings. "This doesn't change anything," he stammered, though his voice had lost all authority. "I have legal documents." "Your documents mean nothing here," intervened a new and authoritative voice. Everyone turned to see a royal officer approaching, accompanied by 3 soldiers. It was Captain Magnus, known in the region for his fair treatment of Viking clans. "Jarl Grimsson, I've been investigating your theft accusations against several Vikings, and I've discovered an interesting pattern of property document falsification." Jarl Torsten involuntarily stepped back. "That's a lie. I have witnesses. I have witnesses confirming that the white stallion in question was legitimately won by Ragnar in public competition 3 years ago," the captain continued relentlessly. "I also have evidence that you have been extorting families using fraudulent documents. You'll have to accompany me to answer formally to these accusations." While the soldiers escorted a violently protesting Jarl Torsten, Astrid approached her sister with tears freely running down her cheeks. "Sigrid, I came to save you, but I see you don't need saving." She sobbed. "I need to ask your forgiveness." Sigrid took her sister's hands in hers. "What happened, Astrid? Why did you really come?" "My engagement broke," Astrid confessed with a broken voice. "The chieftain's son decided I wasn't submissive enough, that I had too many opinions of my own. Father is furious with me. Mother blames me for ruining the family alliance." She sobbed. "I realized you were the fortunate one. You freed yourself from that golden prison, and I'm still trapped." Sigrid embraced her sister tightly. "Then stay here. There's space. There's work to be done. You can choose your own path." "Really?" Astrid whispered with fragile hope shining in her eyes. "Really?" Ragnar confirmed, approaching to join the conversation. "Any family of Sigrid's is welcome here." In the months that followed, the valley transformed into something extraordinary. Sigrid's medicinal garden flourished beyond her wildest dreams, with plants growing lush under her constant care. Astrid stayed, learning the art of healing alongside her sister and finding purpose in helping organize a trade system between the Viking clans and Norwegian settlers. The clinic that Sigrid and Ragnar established together attracted people from everywhere, both Norwegians and Vikings. creating a bridge of understanding between two worlds that had been in conflict for generations. She had become a respected figure, known as the Valley Healer, while Ragnar served as mediator between the clans and Norwegian authorities. One afternoon, exactly 1 year after her arrival at the valley, Sigrid was working in the garden when she heard a wagon approaching. To her surprise, Jarl Bjorn and Lady Helga descended, visibly aged and humble in a way she had never seen. "Sigrid," her father began with a trembling voice, "we have come to ask your forgiveness. Astrid has written to us about your work here, about the life you've built. We realized we sent you away thinking you were a burden, when in reality you were the strongest of all of us." Lady Helga approached with tears in her eyes. "I was a terrible mother. I judged you by superficial standards and never saw the treasure I had before me. Can you ever forgive me?" Sigrid felt complex emotions swirling in her chest. These were the people who had hurt her deeply, who had considered her expendable. But she also saw in their faces genuine regret and belated understanding of their error. "I forgive you," she finally said, feeling an ancient weight lifting from her shoulders, "because holding resentment would only hurt me. You sent me here thinking it was punishment, but you gave me the greatest gift, the opportunity to discover who I really am." Ragnar emerged from the house, positioning himself beside Sigrid with a protective but open expression. "Your daughter has saved dozens of lives," he said, addressing Sigrid's parents. "She has built bridges between communities that were divided. She has created something beautiful where there was only mistrust." He took Sigrid's hand in his. "And she taught me that true love is not found. It's built day by day with respect, shared work, and common purpose." Jarl Bjorn observed their joined hands, the way his daughter glowed with genuine happiness, and finally understood the magnitude of what he had almost destroyed. "You are richer than I will ever be," he murmured, "because you have something money could never buy me: true peace." 3 years later, Sigrid contemplated the valley from the porch of her expanded house as the sun painted the sky gold and crimson. Her medicinal garden now covered almost an entire acre, with plants of all kinds growing in organized harmony. The adjacent clinic attended patients constantly, with Astrid directing operations alongside apprentices, both Viking and Norwegian. In her arms, she held her newborn daughter, a small one with dark eyes who had arrived in the world with the songs of Viking women and the prayers of her grandmother Helga, who now lived permanently in the valley helping with the community's children. Ragnar sat beside her, passing his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset together. "Do you ever imagine what your life would have been like if you had stayed at the estate?" he asked softly. Sigrid smiled, drawing her baby against her chest. "Sometimes. But then I remember that some people spend their entire lives searching for their purpose, and I had the blessing of finding mine in the least expected place." She looked up at her husband. "They sent me here in exchange for a horse, considering me worthless. But I found something no wealth could buy. I found my place in the world. I found my calling. I found the love that sees me exactly as I am and loves me for it." The sun finally set behind the mountains, painting the valley with purple and golden shadows. In the distance, smoke from the community's fires rose toward the sky like silent offerings. Two people who had begun as strangers forced to coexist now shared a life built on respect, purpose, and genuine love. And in that valley where she had arrived as exchanged merchandise, Sigrid had discovered the deepest truth of all, that a person's true value is never measured by what others think of her, but by the difference she makes in the lives she touches. She had been sent as punishment, but she had found her destiny. And that destiny was more beautiful than any dream she would have dared to imagine in those dark days at the Eriksson estate. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more fascinating stories about history's greatest figures and events.